Probably heard the tale of you put a frog in a kettle. Are you familiar with this tale? The story goes that if you were to put a frog in a kettle of cool water, it will just sit there. But if you put a frog in a kettle of boiling water, it's going to jump right out. And if you have ever wondered what would happen if you put a frog in a kettle of cool water and then slowly turn the temperature up, I have two things. Number one, I'm praying for you, okay? Because if that's what goes through your mind, you need some prayer. Secondly, though, you can kind of put your worries to rest because someone actually tried it, okay? And then they videotaped it as well. So if this is you, if you're wondering what happens, then you're going to be able to see what happens. Now, for those of you that are very much a frog lover, I do want you to know that no frogs were injured in making of this video. There was actually a stunt double that was used toward the end. So let's just see what happens when you take a frog and put it in a kettle of cool water and turn up the heat just a little bit.
A frog is a cold-blooded animal, and humans are warm-blooded, so our body burns energy or perspires to maintain the same 98.6 degrees. The cold-blooded frog's body temperature goes up and down with the temperature of its surroundings. Although frogs love water, when I hold it over this pot of boiling water, this frog is very uncomfortable and climbs to get away from it. Now, the water in this pot is room temperature, 69.4 degrees, so he's comfortable when I put him in. If I turn the burner on low flame, his body temperature will adjust and slowly he will heat up with the water. The water temperature has risen to 80 degrees and the frog is the same temperature and still comfortable. If I turn up the burner slowly again, he won't notice, because he'll continue to change to be the same as his surroundings. When we started, I held the frog over the first pot of boiling water. He was uncomfortable and he tried to get away from the heat. But now, because we're raising the temperature slowly, he doesn't recognize the danger he's in. He just keeps going along with the changes in his surroundings. Eventually, we can turn up the burner to a deadly boil. He will just keep trying to adjust with it. By the time he realizes it's killing him, it's too late. He won't notice in time because he just keeps changing himself to go along with the changes in his surroundings.
Couple of things on that. Number one, I prefer my frog legs deep fried. I don't really care for the boiled frog legs, but to each his own. Secondly, that science is questionable at best. So, okay, we're not making a science experiment declaration here, but there is a moral to that whole story about the frog in the kettle, and that is we better be careful with how we are adjusting to our surroundings, because what feels nice and warm and cozy for you right now could actually be the cauldron that cooks your goose tomorrow. So be careful how you adjust to the situation and the circumstances or the culture around you. What our church is doing right now, we're taking a trip all the way through the Bible, and if you look on the walls, we're having pictures from every chapter that we've been talking about thus far. We started at the very beginning. God created the heavens and the earth, and we're just taking our way through, and we're finding there are two major storylines. The first is what we call the upper story, where we see God's great big plans for a relationship with us. Even though we as human beings have disobeyed Him and turned away from Him, God still wants to have a relationship with us. And so we're tracking that big upper story of God as He plans and purposes throughout all these different people's lives, or these different generations, to bring us back into a relationship with Him. We've been going through the Old Testament. Last week we talked about King David, and now we get to talk about David's successor, and that was his son Solomon. As you remember, we talked last week about David having an affair with a lady by the name of Bathsheba, and a child was conceived. Sadly, that child died in infancy. But yet, David and Bathsheba had another child, another son. And he grew up, and his name is Solomon. And when David was old, about 70 years of age, he appointed Solomon to be his successor to the throne as the king of Israel. David, as you may remember, he was an amazing warrior. He fought lots of battles, and he was an incredible soldier and a leader. Solomon was more of a peacemaker. And if David was the one who kind of cleared the ground and got things ready for King Solomon, he was the builder. And he built all types of things. David had collected lots of resources and finances in order to set his son Solomon up for his ministry as he became the next king. And so as Solomon became the king, he made alliances with different nations all around them. And so for his 40-year reign, they were at peace. I mean, it was a great time to be king. There was lots of finances available. They were at peace. And David was a great king, and so Solomon was able to come right in and kind of ride the wave of momentum that he and his family were having politically. So I want to read for you from the story. This is in chapter 13. If you're following in the Bible, this is in 1 Kings chapter 2, and I'll have the words on the screen for you as well so we could follow along even in that way. And this is what we read from the word of the Lord. When the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon his son. I'm about to go the way of all the earth, he said. So be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him, and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations, as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go, and that the Lord may keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. Then we're going to drop down to verse 10. Then David rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. He had reigned 40 years over Israel, 7 years in Hebron and 33 in Jerusalem. So Solomon sat on the throne of his father David, and his rule was firmly established. Man, this was the time to be a king. No debt. They didn't have $36 trillion of debt that he had to deal with. There were no wars. David had conquered the enemies, and Solomon was creating peace treaties. It was a great time to be king. And by the way, Solomon was very popular in Israel. He would have won the popular vote in a landslide. And as we think of King Solomon and the life that he has, I want to kind of give just a raceway through the life of King Solomon. But after Solomon became king, here he is, 20 years of age. His dad was 70 when he passed away. His dad was incredibly popular. And now here comes Solomon, 20-year-old kid. Now he's the king of the whole country, nation of Israel. And I think he realized, I'm in deep weeds here. I need a lot of help. And he went to bed that night, and God appeared to him in a dream. And here's what the Lord said to King Solomon. He said, ask whatever you want me to give you. Man, I wish God would show up in a dream like that and tell me that. Ask for whatever you want from me, and I'm going to give it to you. I wonder what you would ask for if the Lord appeared to you in a dream and he gave you that blank check. What would you ask for? Maybe you'd ask for that perfect body, so that when you walk over to the Independence public pool, people will say, wow, look at that guy, look at that girl, that's the perfect body. I so wish I had that. Or maybe you're thinking, wouldn't it be great, Lord, if you could give me the winning ticket for the Mega Millions lottery? Did you hear about that? Somebody won. And the prize got up to $1.1 billion. You guys haven't heard about this? Man, okay, that's good. You don't need to hear about this. And if you took, and somebody won, the winning ticket was sold in California. I sure hope it's not around anywhere near Orange County, LA. Wouldn't that just be terrible if it was? The lump sum of that lottery, $520 million lump sum. You could just take it just as a lump sum. Or you can take 29-year installments. But if you die within those 29 years, they stop. So most people take the lump sum. Would you ask for wealth? I want lots of money. I want to be a millionaire. What would you ask for? Some people might ask, oh, I sure wish my health would get better. I wish I had the perfect spouse. Wish I had, whatever. Well, Solomon, he makes a request that I believe is the greatest request you could ask of God outside of his forgiveness. And here's what Solomon prayed. He asked God, he said, I am a little child, and I do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? Wow. Solomon knew something that I think we all need to understand. Without the help of God, we can't do anything right. We need God's great strength. We need God's great wisdom to be able to live the life that we are supposed to live. So Solomon asked for wisdom. I read about what Solomon asked for in response to God's offer. It makes my private golf course seem just a little selfish, honestly. But, you can dream anyhow. There is a difference, between wisdom and knowledge, right? There is a difference. Because wisdom is this. Wisdom is the ability to discern or judge what is true and right and lasting. These are dictionary definitions. Knowledge, on the other hand, is information gained through experience or reasoning or acquaintance. You can have a lot of knowledge, but just because you have a lot of knowledge does not mean you have a lot of wisdom. I can remember when I was working at an electrical supply house, we wanted to make this big wire rack. So you can put big reels of wire on it, and then we could pull the wire off because we can cut it to length. And so the way to do that is, I think we had like 4-inch pipe. But the T's we had to cut in half. And so we knew a guy that worked there. He had this torch. And, it's one of those torches, isn't the acetylene torch where, you have the gas and you have the oxygen and you can light the thing. Is it acetylene? Am I saying the right thing? And so he said, hey, you want to do it? I said, yeah, sure, I want to do it. I saw my dad do it all the time. And so I was able to get the flame lit, but then you have to know how to, dial that in just right so it gets to that really hot blue flame. And so he's standing there watching me. I a little clicker thing, and I make the spark, and I could light the flame, and then I would try to adjust the dials. I couldn't get it right. And then, of course, we've got oxygen here. We have acetylene gas and everything. I had some knowledge as to how that is supposed to work. What I was lacking was wisdom. Okay? We were talking in our class earlier. If I went to the library and I checked out the Brain Surgery for Dummies book, and I read through that book, I would have knowledge. Would you like me to perform a brain surgery on you? No, I've got all kinds of knowledge. Oh, you understand now the difference between knowledge and wisdom. I like how someone put it. They said, wisdom is knowledge rightly applied. It's not just knowledge. So how do I apply this knowledge in the right way? Now, I don't know how God gave Solomon that wisdom. I don't know. I have my flash drive with me. I don't know if God just kind of downloaded, the wisdom into Solomon's heart like I downloaded information onto this flash drive. I don't know how he ended up doing it, but Oh, the Bible says that God granted Solomon that wisdom that he prayed for, and that wisdom was quickly put to the test. One of the famous stories of King Solomon and his reign happened very early on. Two mothers came to Solomon with a newborn child. They both had just recently given birth. The one mother said that her child was the living child, whereas the other lady, her child died. And what that other lady did is she took my baby when I was asleep, and she took my baby who's alive, and she gave me the dead child. I woke up, and then I looked at this child, and I couldn't believe that my baby was dead. But when I looked closer, I realized this is not my baby. And so the case came before King Solomon. Find out who the mother is. Man, that's tough. Because, they didn't have DNA testing back then and some ways that we have to be able to determine, okay, whose baby who's the mother of the living child, whose mother is the dead child. And so Solomon said, hey, here's what we'll do. He called for one of his attendants, bring me a sword. So they brought the king a sword, said, cut the living baby in two. Give one half to this mother and one half to that mother. And the mother, whose child was alive, she said, no, don't kill my baby. Let her have my baby. And Solomon said, that's the mother. Give the baby to the mother who doesn't want the child to die. Because the other lady was like, hey, this is a great idea. Let's do this. A father heard that story. Maybe he read it in his devotions one day, and then it was like that same day, his kids were arguing over their Matchbox cars. And the kids came up, and they were fighting over this one particular car. That's mine, that's mine, that's mine, that's mine. And the dad's like, I know exactly what to do. So he set his sons down in front of them. He said, kids, here's what we're going to do. You say this car is yours, right? That's right. But you say it's yours. That's right, Dad, it's mine. He said, here's what we'll do. We're going out in the garage, and we're going to get the hacksaw. We're going to cut this car in half. You'll get half, and you'll get the other half. And those boys, their eyes lit up real big. They, oh, cool, Dad. And so they got a whole bucket of cars like, come on. And so they went out there, and it didn't work quite the way it worked for Solomon, okay? But, it takes some wisdom to actually apply wisdom, doesn't it? We need to know how we can utilize this wisdom that God gives us. Here's the one thing I do know. Every one of us here today, we need God's wisdom. Because we are hilariously in over our heads. We need his wisdom to be the parents we're trying to be, don't we? We need wisdom in our marriage. We need wisdom in our finances. And man, these are crazy times. Maybe you have decisions that you have to make at your job. You need wisdom at school. How can I do my best here? And how can I be a good student? And there's not a day that goes by that we can't get along without the wisdom of God. So how do we get wisdom? Do we have to wait for God to show up and appear to us and speak to us in a dream and say, hey, here's a blank check? Is that what we have to do? I'm grateful that that's not the answer. Here's what the Bible tells us. God offers this amazing thing in James chapter 1, verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, is anybody like that? You're lacking wisdom, or do you have all the wisdom you need? Can I see a hand of people who need wisdom? I saw one in the back. Okay, I need wisdom. I've got some knowledge, but I need a lot of wisdom. Here's the beautiful offer. If any of you lacks wisdom, that's all of us, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. If you need wisdom, God says just ask. He's a generous God, and he will give you the wisdom that you need. If you feel like you're in over your head, ask God for wisdom. If you feel like you're not quite sure the decisions to make, take time to pray and ask God for wisdom. He will give you wisdom in ways you can't even imagine right now. He's just that good at it. I've said this so many times before, but it's still so true. It is not what you know that counts. It's what you apply That is what really, really counts. Solomon prayed, and God gave him incredible wisdom. And he was in a position and as the king where he needed that wisdom. And then he was given opportunities to be able to use the wisdom, the abilities, and the gifts that God gave him. Now, what are you going to do with that? Solomon used all the blessings that God gave him, and he wrote 3 books of the Bible. He wrote the book of Proverbs, which is a favorite book for many people. He wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, which is the very last book that he wrote in his lifetime. And then he wrote the book of the Song of Solomon, which he wrote to his favorite wife. We'll just put it that way. Which that's a great book to read as couples, but you probably shouldn't read that at least until you're in premarital counseling anyway. The wisdom that God gave Solomon, he was able to use that to build the temple of the Lord. And no expense was spared to build this temple for God. Prior to Solomon's temple being built, they were still worshiping with the tabernacle or the tent that they had. It was something they would construct and they would carry around 40 years in the desert. And then they had that thing set up all through, even through David's reign. And David collected vast resources so that Solomon would have the materials that he would need to be able to build this temple for God. And when that temple was completed, we read that the presence of God came and dwelt in an area that they called the most holy place, where God came and he dwelt among the people, which, by the way, that's a reference to Christ. That's what God's plan was all along. In the Garden of Eden, he walked with them in the cool of the day. And because of sin, then the presence of God was taken away from them. And God would walk sparingly and intermittently with different people. It would appear to them. But here, God is dwelling with them. And that word dwell, or that word tabernacle is what it means. It's the same word that we find in John chapter 1, where it says, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, or tabernacled among us. He came to live with us, and he comes to live in us. When they dedicated that temple, there was an offering that was taken, and the Bible says the offering was so large that you couldn't even count the offering. Wouldn't that be a great problem for the church treasurer to have? I mean, let's do it, all right? Let's see what happens. See if she can count it all right? That would be an incredible thing. So Solomon used the gifts that he had and realized the greatest work of his life is what I could do for God. So I use what God gives me to honor him. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul, he talks about living a purpose-filled life. In Philippians chapter 3, he says this, one thing I do, forgetting what is behind. Boy, that's something we all need to do, right? Forget what's behind. Whatever happened, that happened. You may be a product of your past, but you do not have to be a prisoner to your past. He said, this one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead. I press on toward the goal, to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. The greatest work that you could do is to live a life that is fulfilling the purpose for which God has designed you. Paul said, there's one thing I do, not 100 things I dabble in. He says, I'm doing one thing. That's it. And knowing your purpose, for the reason why God has you here, it gives you meaning for your life. If you know the purpose of your life, it simplifies life. If you're knowing your purpose, it focuses your life. Do you know what the purpose is for your life? Make money? Retire? Go to Florida? What's the purpose? You tell me the things you're doing, but what's the purpose? I believe that we should live our lives so that we can help other people to know and love and follow Jesus. And that can take on all kinds of ways we do that. But we help people to know and love and follow Jesus. That will give meaning to your life, that will simplify your life, and that will focus your life. One person that we see that did that was King Solomon. He used his gifts of leadership. He used his gifts as an engineer, as an architect, as a general contractor, as a writer. He used his gifts as a diplomat. And there are things that Solomon did even in his day that are still making an impact today, that are helping people know and love and follow Jesus. I mentioned those books of the Bible that he's written, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Many of you would point to the book of Proverbs as, okay, I can find my life verse right there. And oftentimes people will say, yeah, my life verse was written by King Solomon. He said, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. That came from the hand of King Solomon as he was inspired by God. Somebody else who, in my lifetime, they're using their gifts to help others to know and love and follow Jesus. Her name is Beverly. I first heard of Beverly. There was a kid from the seminary I attended in Mississippi. He was going to around the neighborhood, knocking on people's doors. So he knocked on this door, and Beverly gets up from her chair, and she goes over, she opens the door, and there's a student there. And he's sharing the gospel with her. If you were to die tonight, and you were to stand before God, and he would ask, why should I let you into my heaven? What would you say? That was the question he led with, and then he shared the gospel with her. On that doorstep, Beverly prayed to receive Jesus Christ as her Lord and Savior. I mean, that's amazing. And as she went back in her house, she sat back down and she realized, you know what? I'm a doctor here in Jackson, Mississippi. I own 4 abortion clinics throughout the state of Mississippi. Now I've just given my heart to Jesus. One of the first things that Beverly did is she closed down all 4 of her abortion clinics. If you get to meet Beverly, maybe some of you have seen her because she's been on the show Oprah Winfrey different times being interviewed, and she would share her story about this young seminarian came and told her about Jesus, and she gave her heart to Christ, and how now she is actually one of the kindest, most compassionate doctors that I have ever met in my life. The reason I know that is because I met her, first off, when she was a board member at the seminary that I was a part of. Remember, this was the doctor who owned the abortion clinics, and the seminarian came and told her about Jesus. She eventually became a member of the board of that seminary. Now, that's kind of impressive. What really impacted me was Beverly McMillan. She was the doctor who brought our first 2 children into the world. And if you were to go to her clinic, you have an appointment, and the appointment is just when you should show up. There's no guarantee that that's when your appointment is going to be, because she would take all the time that was necessary for every woman who came in that she could treat. And there were times that she just put her hand over our unborn child, and she prayed, dear God, help me to know how I can help this baby, how I can help this mom, how I can help this family. I've seen her do it multiple times. It was so beautiful to see that. What she did is she took the gifts, the abilities, the wisdom that God gave her, and she helped other people to know and love and follow Jesus. When you'd walk into her clinic, you just felt the presence, the peaceful presence of Jesus in that place. And it's a beautiful thing. Through Solomon, we learned some of the greatest dangers. And one of the greatest dangers is that it can lead us away from God. You remember the frog in the kettle? Yeah. We talked about him just a little bit earlier. When the water temperature was nice and cool, you just sit around, it's all good. But as that water was slowly turned up a little more, the story says that the frog just got used to the temperature around him. Here's the lesson. Most people do not fall away from God instantly. Most people who fall away from God do so gradually. Solomon's life warns us of so many lukewarm pots we can get ourselves into. And if we're not careful, those pots, the heat can slowly be turned up in those pots, and it becomes the very thing that ruins us. Throughout the book of Proverbs, he has lots of different things that he identifies. Beware of that. Be careful of that. Don't get in that pot. I'll just give you a few of them this morning. You can read the whole book of Proverbs for yourself. But he tells us this: a gossip betrays confidence. Gossip is a pot that you can get yourself into. And he's warning us, don't do that. A gossip betrays confidence, so avoid anyone who talks too much. Do you know people who talk too much? Do you know people who gossip? I don't have a problem with gossip, but everybody else I tell, they got the problem with gossip. He tells us another one. A fortune made by a lying tongue is a fleeting vapor and a deadly snare. He said, watch out for that. You don't want to get in there, because that'll cook your goose real fast. He also tells us this: sluggards, that means lazy people, do not plow in season. So at a harvest time, they look but find nothing. It's another pot. He's telling them, don't get in that pot. Don't be lazy. Here's another one. Better to live in the desert than with a quarrelsome and nagging wife. I remember I preached on this one time, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said, Pastor, I just found my new life verse. Like, okay, I don't know what's going on in your home, but they picked that one. So he does tell us this as well. There is no wisdom, no insight, no plan that can succeed against the Lord. Those are just some of the ways that Solomon warns us. Don't be so accustomed to living in the culture around you and just become like everything else around you, because that is going to cook your goose. But yet we do it anyway, don't we? We think we're going to be the exception, don't we? That's what we call a miracle. If you do all those things and you avoid getting cooked, that's what we call a miracle. No, what he's saying is this is how life works. If you find yourself stuck in these things, you're going to pay for it. You're not going to like it. As a side note, the book of Proverbs has 31 chapters. I know many people, they will read a chapter of Proverbs every day. So today is January 12th, and so they'll read chapter 12 of Proverbs. And it's really a great way to work your way through the book of Proverbs. If you've never read the book of Proverbs before, I encourage you to do that. They're just very short little statements, just like the ones I was reading. But yet, every time I read through Proverbs, there's just something else that jumps out at me like, oh, I need to think about that. Or just that word or that short little statement that sticks with me through the day. So if you're looking for a book of the Bible to read, book of Proverbs, it's a terrific book. Read one chapter a day, and in a month, you'll read through the entire book of Proverbs. Well, Solomon, he started out life well. He did an incredible job of living for God. He dedicated the temple, and God filled him with wisdom. He filled the temple with his presence, and he was doing all kinds of great things. He started out well, but he finished very poorly. Despite all the wisdom God gave him, despite all the riches that God gave him, the blessings of God, Solomon was like that frog in the kettle. He slowly turned away from the Lord. Here's what we read in 1 Kings chapter 11. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods. And his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. Do you know what that means? Solomon got cooked. That's really what it's saying. And we need to keep in mind that it feels nice and warm and cozy right now in this relationship. I know I shouldn't be in this, but I'm in it anyway. Or this feels good right now, and I mean, who's going to find out about this tax thing I got going on? It's a little shady. Or we need to realize what feels cozy now will cook your goose tomorrow. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. I wish Solomon would have lived out his own advice that he gave to us. We need to pray for each other, not just to start out strong, but we need to pray that God will help us to finish strong. It's a daily choice to continue to walk with Jesus, to pursue the Word and the ways and the will and the wisdom of God. In the final book of Solomon, the book of Ecclesiastes, he gets through that entire book. If you read that book, read the book through all in one setting. Don't just try to piecemeal your way through it, because you'll be so confused and you won't make the point. You won't get what he's trying to say. Solomon he tried everything in life. He didn't spare his heart any pleasures. That's not a wise way to live, by the way. That's a stupid way to live. But Solomon, he gets to the very end of his life, and he at the end of that very book, he gives us, I believe, some of the greatest advice you can ever follow. He tells us this: "Now, all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God, keep His commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind." He tells us this: fear God, keep His commandments. Sometimes we read that word, fear God, we think, oh, it's like, this is terror. I'm terrified of God. That's not really what he's trying to get across to us. Although if you aren't living for God, there should be some terror that we sense inside of us, because I know I'll stand before Him someday. It really is living in reverence. It's living in wonder. It's living in amazement to God. It's living as if you really believe God is great. His wisdom is great. His plans are great. His ways are great. His timing is great. His power is great. His justice is great. That everything God does is great, and everything God does is good. That's how you live in the fear of the Lord. And if I'm living like that, then following His commands, the directions that God gives me, that's not a burden. It's a blessing. I recognize the greatness of God, that He understands far more than I do. And so the wise thing to do is actually to listen to what He's saying. I mean, the one that created life, don't you think He has the best idea of how to live life? The one who created you, don't you think it's best to follow His direction as He speaks to you? That's living in the fear of the Lord. Fear the Lord and keep His commandments. When we live like this, the commandments of God, they're not a prison, they're a pathway to a blessed life. It says in the book of Psalms, "Blessed are all who fear the Lord, who walk in obedience to Him." What I have found is one of the best ways to fear God and keep His commandments is to not do this on my own. I have to do this with others. I have to have people in my life who are trying to follow God and keep His commandments. They're living in such a way that that helps me to know God. And I have several individuals in my life. They actually help me do that. You cannot live a full Christian life if you're trying to do it all on your own. You will fail every time. I've got people in my life, they tell me when I'm doing right, but they also tell me when I'm doing wrong. Do you have people like that? I don't know if Solomon had anybody in his life that he listened to who would tell him when he's doing right and when he's doing wrong. I don't know if he had that or not. The bigger question is, do you? Do you have someone who lifts you up, but also holds you up and holds you accountable? Oh, if you don't have somebody like that, I pity you. I really do. We have a number of groups in our church they're trying to do that very same thing. We have small groups that we're all going through the story together. We have 3 that meet on Sundays. We have another meets on Mondays. We have groups for the kids. We have groups for the youth. And if you're not in one of those groups, I cannot emphasize enough. You need to join one of those groups. You really need to. And if you're not able to join one of those, Please start your own. Please get a group of people together who love God. They want to know and love and follow Jesus, and they can help you do the same thing. I'm amazed at what some of you guys are doing. That you've done this on your own because you knew naturally, I can't do this on my own. We need a community of people. And I promise you that if you find yourself and you commit to a community of believers, I promise you, you will grow faster and you will produce more fruit in your Christian life than you ever have tried to do that on your own. That's how God's family works. We do this together. It's like somebody said, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.